Hey, everybody, welcome back to Historians of Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are talking about movies and the histories behind them. And this week we are talking about one of my favorite Christmas shows of all time. I'm talking about A Charlie Brown Christmas. Guys, there is a pantheon of Christmas shows that I love to watch, and Charlie Brown Christmas is one of them. So for you guys this year, I wanted to invite back one of my great friends. I'm talking about Blake Scott Ball. He's an associate professor at the University of North Alabama. And more importantly for our conversation, he's actually the author of Charlie Brown's America, the popular politics of Peanuts, talking about how Peanuts is illustrating the world around it from the 60s onward. So we have the best conversation in line for you tonight, talking about A Charlie Brown Christmas, talking about Peanuts, talking about Charles Schulz, talking about the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, all the way to today. We talk about the soundtrack, and of course, we get some Snoopy in there too. So sit back and relax, guys. A Charlie Brown Christmas is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. All right, let's do this. I am excited. Blake, you've been on the pod twice now. This is your third time.
That's my third time.
Your third time, and we finally get to talk actually about your for the very first time. Actually, get to talk about your book. For those of you watching, Charlie Brown's America: The Popular Politics of Peanuts. I have sent this picture of this book around so freaking many times today, like because I got into reading it yesterday, and I was like, okay, I need to prep up. I need to read the books, and then I just kept reading it some more, and then so like last year, I got the book last year, if I recall correctly. And usually the presses just send me copies of whatever I want. I bought your book, dude. Like I shielded. You've got residuals from me somewhere in there, propping up. Your family owes me a life debt. Like this is a Chewbacca Han Solo thing now.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you. I love this book. And this is the perfect time to talk about one of my favorite Christmas movies ever, right?
Sure.
I mean,
a pure classic,
dude. All right, all right. Let's talk about this. People, like this is your third time on. I feel weird like introducing you on the podcast now. Go ahead and do it. Like, tell us about you real fast. Give us the truncated version.
Yeah. So I am associate professor of history at the University of North Alabama. Got the incredible opportunity this year to come back home to my alma mater and join the department. A lot of wonderful people here, and super excited to be here. Charlie Brown's America is my first book. It started as my dissertation when I was a grad student at University of Alabama, and now I'm currently working on a cultural biography of Batman. So we'll have more to talk about. Down the road.
Will we find time to talk about Batman at some point in time on this podcast? I wonder. For those of you who have not been to Florence, Alabama, and not visited the University of North Alabama, I have to tell you guys, I gave a talk there, I think last year. It is a gem of a town. It is a wonderful university. Oh my gosh. And the faculty is amazing there, and the students are amazing. Like, you have no idea how much love I have for that school. A place I visited one time. Matt Shanebuckler invited me up. And just the most amazing, wonderful. It is everything you want out of a college experience. It's such a cool place.
It's a special place.
I'm jealous, man. That is a really cool place that you live.
Thanks, man.
And the fact that you get to come back to your alma mater.
Yeah.
Is so cool.
Dude,
how often does that happen?
It's humbling. I love it.
It happens at Harvard and UNA. I like UNA more. I've been to Harvard. I like the campus. You know, I don't care. All right, let's talk about this one. And let's talk about the show. First question. Here's your big one. I see you drinking Coca-Cola tonight. That's going to come into our conversation.
Sponsors, yeah.
Oh, I love it. All right, first question. Here's an easy one. Favorite song on the soundtrack. What do you got?
All right. Well, I mean, obviously, Linus and Lucy is just, you know, quintessential. Like it's key American music. But I don't I don't necessarily associate that with Christmas, right? It comes out of this soundtrack, but I don't hear that and think Christmas. I hear that and think Charlie Brown.
Totally.
Uh, I think, um, for my money, give me Christmas Time Is Here. The opening song, they're skating on the ice. It's
Mm.
it's kind of chill, haunting, wintry.
There's that. There's the is it on the snare drum with the brush. That sh.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
pantheon Christmas. I mean, this is one of the great Christmas albums ever made,
yeah.
and some of the songs on here, like you can't have like a Christmas mixtape without something without at least one thing from this album, right? I
Sure,
mean,
sure.
and it's got to be Christmas Time Is Here, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah.
you like the one with the kids singing, or do you like the one well the one without the lyrics?
I like the one with the kids singing. I like, I think that was one of the key things they were going for was like they wanted children's voices in this, both in the voice acting and in the songs, and so yeah, I love it. I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, okay. So I know a thing that the listeners don't, which is I've already read the book. And so you actually talk quite a bit about the making of this Christmas special quite a bit, which I think the listeners will want to hear about. And we'll
Yep.
get into how this thing gets funded and so forth. But yeah, the idea of choosing Vince Guaraldi and choosing these kids, do you want to jump in and actually we can talk a little bit about like why that was so revolutionary and what 64 was it when this thing is
Uh,
released?
65, December
65. Okay.
65. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, so the whole thing actually has its roots. The whole setup for a Charlie Brown Christmas happening has its roots in um, uh, San Francisco Giants baseball.
Clearly. Absolutely. That is exactly what I was expecting where I was
that's
expecting you to go with
that's
this.
where this go. That's where you go, right? Um,
Obviously.
so Charles Schultz is originally a Midwest guy.
Mhm.
Grew up in St. Paul. That's where all the hockey stuff comes from in Peanuts. And he moves in the late 50s out to north of San Francisco. And so, as a sports guy, he gets tickets. He heads down to San Francisco. It's about an hour drive from where they live, and loves to take his sons, and they go to ball games. Um, well, at some point, early 60s, 62 or so, the San Francisco Giants um, have a Charles Schultz Peanuts Day at the ball stadium, and bring out the kids, bring out the families, and one of the people in attendance there who was familiar with Peanuts but had never really thought very much about it was a young um, documentary producer by the name of Lee Mendelson. And Lee Mendelson was working on a documentary that would air on network TV in that period on Willie Mays. So that's where Mays was at that point in his career. That's where Mendelson was, and he happens to cross paths with Charles Schultz as they're talking, and he's hearing some about this guy's story and thinking more about the reach of Peanuts and the connection it's having with the culture. He thinks we should do a documentary about Charles Schultz, and that could be my next piece. And so they work on it, they finish it. It's in existence, but none of the networks ever pick it up. He's pitching it and pitching it and pitching it, and there's just no buyer for this. I mean, there's one extended scene in this documentary is Schultz driving his kids and the neighbors' kids in the school carpool, and he's just talking as he's dropping the kids off, and so for for a Charles Schultz guy, I think it's gold. But for the network folks, not interesting enough. Well, in the summer of '65, when Mendelssohn is still trying to get this thing sold somewhere, he reaches out to a buddy at uh, J. Walter Thompson um, uh, advertising firm. One of their major clients was Coca-Cola, and he mentions, "Hey, I've got this documentary about this artist. He does Peanuts, and the guy, his buddy, says, I'm sorry, we don't really have anything for that." He said, "Really, what we're searching for right now um, is a Christmas special." And Mendelssohn goes, "Oh, dude, well, do I have something for you?" He's like, "Charlie Brown Christmas." And like, "Oh, this fantastic. Well, hey, I've got a meeting with Coca-Cola is wanting to sponsor a family friendly Christmas special. I've got a meeting with them on Monday. Could you have it to me by Monday?" This is midweek. Mendelssohn says, "Yeah, sure." Hangs up the phone. Immediately calls Schultz. "Hey, Sparky," is what they called him. "Hey, Sparky, what are you doing this weekend?" He said, "Oh, well, I didn't have any big plans. Why? What's going on?" He said, "Well, we're writing. We've got to work on a Charlie Brown Christmas." And Schultz says, "What's a Charlie Brown Christmas?" He said, "It's a Christmas special I just sold to Coca-Cola." And they literally spent 3 days that weekend. Mendelssohn drives up to Santa Rosa, and they spend 3 days that weekend hammering this thing out. And I've seen, I've one of the cool moments in the archives. I have seen the original script they wrote that weekend, and talk about cut and paste and scratching out and rewriting lines in the margins and everything else. I mean, they over a slam bam session in a weekend, they wrote this thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, the story that you tell about how this comes to be. And for our listeners out there, one in particular, can we go ahead and reiterate that? Wouldn't you say it's true, Blake, that Coca-Cola saves Christmas?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, just to make sure that it's Coke and not Pepsi that is responsible for all good things in the world. Um, for one listener in the Northeast right now, I want to backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
You wrote a dissertation and then this amazing book through Oxford University Press about the popular politics of Peanuts. How does a guy come to write a book? That, and this is not a biography of Charles Schulz.
Right.
Very adamantly not. You're looking at the world around Peanuts and how Peanuts is responding to this stuff. What's the germination of this? Like, how did you come to this idea, Blake?
Well, there's kind of two stories. One is the story of my childhood, and the which I didn't fully appreciate at the time that I started working on this project. The more immediate story, was the story of a pre PhD grad school crisis.
Yeah.
um, I had a professor my last semester before I was going as I was the program that I was in. You completed the master's and then tested into the PhD, and so I'd qualified for the PhD program. I was finishing up the semester. It was a professor outside of my field, some coursework I was having to do, and we were sitting down for a meeting late in the semester, and he starts asking about, "Hey, you're finishing up. What are your plans moving forward?" And I said, "Well, I'm planning to come back in the fall and get to work on my PhD." And he said, "Huh?" He said, "I noticed you've got a little bit of an accent there." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, where are you from?" He said, I said, "I'm from Muscle Shoals, Alabama." Oh, okay. He said, "Well, where did you do your undergrad?" I said, "University of North Alabama." He said, "Now you're at Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to do a PhD at Alabama. And he said, what do you study? And at that point, I was working on suburbanization and white flight in the greater Birmingham area, Birmingham, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I studied Alabama civil rights. And he said, you do realize you're working yourself into a bit of a corner here, right? That if there's now, ironically, here we are 15 years later, and I do work at a university in Alabama, but he says at the time, like, you know, if you don't land a job in Alabama, like nobody in Colorado wants an Alabama historian. Like, so he's like, you might want to think about going somewhere else. And so I very seriously did. I thought I left that meeting really in a crisis, like thinking, oh my gosh, I've made a terrible career choice here. And should I call an audible and go somewhere else? The thing was, I had such a great advisor I was working with, a guy by the name of Andrew Hebner, who a great writer, great person, great historian, and was somebody who I just really connected with. He got how I worked. Times when I was hung up on things, he knew how to kind of break through to where I was at. That's in nice. A way that, yeah. So I was like, I don't want to run the risk of making a rash decision, moving somewhere else, and not having that kind of good working situation with my advisor. I think I have something valuable here. So instead, what I will do is I will change my research path. And
also
so
terrifying.
So I said, okay, all right, I don't want to be pigeonholed as the kid from Alabama. So what is the most American possible story I could tell? And I instantly went to Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney. Sure. And then I quickly found that Walt Disney has been done again and again and again.
Not always a happy story with Walt.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, and I also learned since that they can be extremely protective of their copyrights and
extremely
challenging to work with. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, that's not going to work. And then enter none other than Jeff Bezos and the Amazon. For readers who were interested in this book, you might also be interested in, and it suggested a collection of Charlie Brown comic strips. And I thought, I used to love to read Charlie Brown. I always looked forward to Sunday morning Charlie Brown, who's front page of the comics, and I was like, well, what's been written about him? And that's when I started down the rabbit hole of Peanuts. The deeper story is one of the things that I realized the longer I worked on this, and then even after working on Peanuts, I still had this concern before the book was published. I was like, is anybody going to take me seriously as an academic historian if I'm writing about the Sunday funny pages? Or is this just going to be, are people going to take this as like a gimmick type thing or something like that? And so I was like, maybe I need to, do like some, like move into some really hard hitting political history and just, prove my chops and,
right.
Whatever. And, but the more I've continued in this journey and the more opportunities that this book has opened up, the more I've realized that, like this was always the stuff that I was interested in growing up. I was always the kid who, my buddies would joke with me like, Blake, you're way overthinking Charlie Brown. You're way overthinking Batman here. But I'm like, but no, like there's like, in some ways it's this, and it's this mirror of us. right? That's why we laugh at it, and that's why it jerks. It's a tear jerker, and that's why it connects, is because it's reflecting the complex feelings that we're having living through all of this stuff.
Yeah, and so reading through your book, like the thing that becomes apparent is how Schulz himself is wrestling with the
Mm.
world around him and trying to reflect that in the strip as best he can. And he's not always necessarily successful in this. And it kind of, I think, in some ways, kind of underscores the difficulties in which people were trying to reckon with the world as it changed in the latter half of the 20th century. So I guess maybe the thing I want to do here is actually, I don't want to take Charles Schulz for granted here. Can we talk a little bit about, you said he's born in St. Paul, Minnesotan,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
moves to San Francisco. Who is this guy? Because one of the things I really want to get at, and this is a thing that you really illustrate in this book, is the role of evangelical Christianity in his own
Mm.
life and how,
Yeah.
It's weird, Blake. I always just kind of took for granted what the Peanuts were until you're like, then I'm reading and I'm like, oh, this makes sense. Because I think you watch this movie or you watch this show and you go, wait. And I start to compare it to the other shows of its time, Frosty, Rudolph. This is a Christmas show with Christianity in it.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
So who is this guy that we're talking about as
Yeah.
we move through time?
Yeah, so Charles Schulz, as I said, grows up in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's the son of a barber, and he is an only child. He loves sports. He's pretty smart in school. In fact, in elementary school, they move him ahead in the public school system two classes, 2 school years,
Wow.
which actually kind of ends up backfiring because then he's all socially,
Emotionally,
off
he's not
from
there
every,
yet.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And so he's very smart, but school becomes sort of a challenge for him in ways as a result of that. But one of the things that he's really good at is art. He loves to draw cartoons. He loves, particularly as a kid, to draw Popeye, which was one of the big cartoons of the time, and and so his mother enrolls him in a correspondence art course in Minneapolis, and he starts off initially. He would fill out his lessons. He would
Mm.
stamp, send them off in the mail, and wait to get the results back. And as it starts, he's apprehensive about how it's going to go, but or apprehensive. I was like, that's
It
not a word.
works.
Yeah.
It's a word now. All words are made up, Blake.
And but eventually he starts going to the school, and then when he finishes in person, and when he finishes his coursework, he becomes one of the tutors at the school and starts,
Mm.
train other folks. So he's working in this office with other artists, and he's got this dream: I want to have my own comic strip. Like, he's loved them since he was a kid. That's what he wants to do. And then in December of 42, he gets a draft notice. And he is, like I said, he's athletic. He loves baseball. He loves hockey. But he's never really thought of himself as particularly a tough guy. He doesn't have much experience with firearms, had no real interest or desire to go into the military, but now he's got a draft notice, so he has to report to Fort Snelling there in Minneapolis, and from there he ends up at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and then he's shipped out to the European front for 3 years. And he says after the fact, he's very proud of the fact that he is a veteran across his life. In fact, if you go to his cemetery plot today, you won't see a mention of Peanuts. He used his military issue tombstone. with his rank and service,
Wow.
and that's how he wanted to be remembered. So it becomes very important to him. But he says those 3 years at the time were the loneliest years of his life. He had always been with his parents. While he's at basic training, his mother dies of cancer. He didn't know she'd had cancer. It was cervical cancer, and it was at a time
Oh.
when they kept those things kind of secret. And so for him, it's just out of the blue. He's separated from his dad at such an emotional time. And so when he comes home from World War II, um, his father has remarried during the war. His father has remarried, and Schultz is fond of the lady, but it is just such a different world
Sure.
from the one that got taken from him just a few years before. And he feels really lost. He feels just unsure about where life goes now, and he's searching for answers. He meets some people at like a little neighborhood get together, and some people his age, and they attend a Bible study, and they invite him to come. Hey, we just get together, we read the Bible, and we talk about what it means, and and just try and figure it out. And he was at a point in his life that sounds interesting. So he goes and starts hanging out with this group, and starts kind of connecting with man. Here's this book that seems to be
Mhm.
addressing a number of the feelings that I'm having, and through that he connects with the only pastor he knows, which is the minister who did his mother's funeral. His family never really went to church growing up. They were Lutheran, but they never really were active. And so he connects with this minister, gets connected with the church, and Christianity. This is how he's going to meet his first wife. This becomes as much as his artwork as a profession. This evangelical identity becomes a key central part of him. Now, it takes a really interesting course over the course of his life. His faith remains important to him throughout, but his views on um, how that faith should be lived out in public changes. He becomes, especially by the late 70s into the 1980s, with the rise of the new right, he becomes very skeptical and critical of um, the proselytizing of the new right. Just going out, and he says, there he saw it as a very kind of using blunt instruments um, to deal with things that were really extremely personal, extreme, things that needed to be worked out in a conversation between friends over a period of time. Like you couldn't just slap it on a billboard and accurately portray, these issues. And he ultimately, to evangelicals, by the I include in the conclusion of the book, for example, a piece by by the one of the editors of Christianity Today after Schultz passes away, about a early biography about him, where he talks about basically the tragedy of Schultz, that from the evangelical point of view, it's like he lost his faith because he stepped back from telling the world. But that's really not accurate. It was a change of his change of view of how you how you go about living this faith. And for him, it wasn't about, you know, Bible thumping or, going after people. It was about having honest conversation and being honest about doubt and fear and crisis and all of these things, and then looking to the wisdom of the Bible to find comfort and peace in that.
Yeah, it sounds to me, like he's just really a guy who's real, holding very true to like his own faith as a very personal inward journey, right? Which
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
a wonderful good thing to have.
Hmm.
And and this stands in contrast really. And I was thinking as you're telling me, it's like he must have couldn't have stood like the TV evangelist of his time, of the
It,
70s and 80s that you and I
yeah,
grew up on seeing on
yeah,
the TVs.
yeah.
And then, you spell this out in the book. It's a thing. And again, I think here's the wonderful thing I think about when you write a book like Charlie Brown's America. And you said, you were own concerned about like, oh, people are going to take me seriously, things like that. And it's like the themes that we see in Peanuts, we take for granted because it's in Peanuts. And then you spell it out. So I want to give an example here because you're talking about how he's got these very real conversations about, it sounds to me like his time in the war was like this loss of innocence, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and then he comes home and has to forge this new life in this new world around him. And you look at Peanuts, right? So we see Charlie Brown. We're first introduced to Charlie Brown in this episode, and often like we see him in the strips and stuff like that. He's a depressed kid. He's saying is like, I don't know what this is about. I'm sad. I can't figure out what's wrong with me.
Yep.
And so I'm kind of wondering, what are the subtle and frankly unsubtle themes that Schultz is actually working through in his depiction of these children? Because we've got social alienation, atomic anxiety, because this is height of the Cold War. You tell us that Peanuts is born in the Cold War. I never even considered that. Um, you've got emotional conflict all the way down to Linus's blanket, right? So can we talk a little bit about the characters that we're seeing on screen? We see
Yeah.
Linus even later on just drop his blanket and kind of go on a soliloquy there. But can we talk a little bit about the themes that Schultz is trying to illustrate and work through himself on the panel and in Charlie Brown's Christmas, and then later on Great Pumpkin and so forth?
Yeah. Well, I think you highlight a number of them. I think um, we miss the fact in some ways that part of what positions Schultz so perfectly. For example, the security blanket, Linus in the security blanket in the 50s and early 60s. Um, People ask, where did that idea come from?
Mm.
Because the blanket, and I talk about this in the book. The whole thing about this kind of security token, whatever it is for a child, was very present in child psychology, and it was also very present in the post-war baby boomer households. Um, but there wasn't one kind of universal name for this. And so that's why Schultz would say in later interviews, one of my proudest accomplishments is that if you look us up in the Oxford English Dictionary under security blanket, it credits Charles Schultz and Peanuts for the modern definition. And it does. And um, Where's he getting this from? Well, because he is one of the tens of millions of Americans who's raising the baby boomers, right? He's seeing it at home with his kids. And so Peanuts, I think especially for those of us who grew up reading Peanuts, we identify a lot with the kids, right? The anxieties of Charlie Brown, or the bossiness of Lucy, or
Mhm.
the hating math class of Peppermint Patty, or whatever it is. we identify with the kids. The older I've gotten, the more I realize that he wasn't he wasn't just talking to the kids, and he wasn't just talking from the perspective of the kids. He's also talking to the parents, right? As a parent, as an adult. And one of the reasons that the later years of Peanuts changes, and some people by the 90s were saying maybe Peanuts has kind of lost its step, it's a little dated. I think what's actually going there is that uh, Schulz is a grandfather. Schulz is a grandfather, and he's now speaking from the viewpoint of a grandfather about grandchildren, and so there is a change in tone in some of those later strips. He's also thinking a whole lot more about history by those
Mm.
later years of his life, and what's important in World War II and the American Revolution and founding and all those kind of things. But there's, I think emotional empathy is really at the key of at the heart of what makes Peanuts successful. Um, and and I found it, as a historian, I found it a really um, interesting. Uh, we analyze kind of the classic trinity of
Mhm.
race, class, gender. Some folks will put religion. Want to okay, let's add religion in there. Maybe that's in race class. Um, in some ways, I'm a historian of comics, but also I think of myself as an historian of emotion. That if we're really going to bring life to how how it felt to live in these times, we've got to recapture some sense of the emotion, right? And those emotions are often very conflicted, um, joy and sadness at the same time, and um, so I found Peanuts kind of opened my eyes to that in some ways, as a historian, just the significance of that, because so much of Peanuts is about those emotions: sadness, loneliness, being misfit, being misunderstood. Peppermint Patty, who's very clearly uh, she wants to be feminine, but also she's not feminine in the way that the other girls are, and she's okay with that, but she feels like the world doesn't understand that, and so it's a constant struggle. And there were so many in the audience who identify with the struggles that those characters are going through. Um, yeah,
I want to ask you actually. So we talk about who we see on screen. We're talking about Charlie. We're
yeah,
talking about Peppermint Patty.
mhm,
We talking about Lucy. You know where I'm going with this. We watch this show, and there are no children who are non-white. Franklin is not on this episode yet. I
mhm,
don't think he has
mhm.
yet to make an appearance in the Peanuts world. Can we
That's
talk a
right.
little bit about this? And you kind of hinted this in the book. It's about Schultz himself wrestling with, like, when he introduces Franklin, he doesn't quite know what to do with Franklin. Like,
Yeah,
can we talk a little bit about the lack of diversity and then Schultz's attempts to diversify Peanuts?
yeah, yeah. Um, yes, Charles Schultz recognized that he had an incredible platform, an international platform by the late 60s. It's the summer of 1968 when he introduces Franklin.
What a
So
year.
3 years after a Charlie Brown Christmas, Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, some of these big classics that have just skyrocketed um, uh, Peanuts in popularity. Um, One of the things I looked into as a scholar was the world in which Charles Schultz grew up and lived and worked. Um, Schultz grew up in a congressional district that was north of 98% white. When he moves to Northern California, the demographics aren't much more diverse there either. In his work life, he does take seriously the need for equality and the need for diversity. One of the things he's going to be, for example, um, the he's a member the so we don't think about it these days because newspapers are kind of
Yeah.
gone in the 20th century form. Um, Successful newspaper cartoonists um, were millionaires. I mean, these were big money making people. And the National Cartoonist Society, which was the exclusive organization of all the top illustrators and cartoonists in American comics, is it. I mean, it's an exclusive club. Now, Schultz gains a lot of stature by becoming the youngest artist in the mid 50s. He becomes the youngest artist ever to win Cartoonist of the Year. And then by the early 60s, he repeats, he wins it again. Which was another big phenomenon, kind of establishing him as a leading man. And so he's going to be an integral part. You could not even attend the meetings without an invitation from a member, right? It's that kind of organization.
Right.
You have to get an invitation, and then you have to attend so many meetings, and then you have to get like a recommendation from one of the members in order to be considered. Schultz is going to be integral in he's the inviting member to get the first black cartoonist into the National Cartoonist Society, a friend of his by the name of Maury Turner, who was not a national artist at the time. He was in Detroit at that time in the newspapers. He'd originally come out of Oakland, and so he does a comic strip called Wee Pals, which in a lot of ways is Peanuts with diversity before Peanuts diversifies, right? And Schultz respects that. And Schultz believes that Maury Turner is an important voice and that Maury Turner is the right voice to do that. But Wee Pals has a very limited distribution reach. Peanuts is everywhere, literally
National.
everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in 1968, he's been having conversations about this, and he begins to get letters from a Southern California stay-at-home mom by the name of Harriet Glickman. She's Jewish. Her parents had been labor organizers back in Chicago. Original kind of. She was in some ways a red diaper baby. She'd grown up with activism and protest, but she's extremely sincere. She's involved in housing reform in Southern California, and part of some really important legislation that gets rid of some of the redlining that was going on in California housing at the time. And she starts writing to a number of different people, but especially Charles Schultz. Hey, there's no diversity in the comic strip pages, right? Like my kids have other children they play with every day, and then they never see any representation of those folks on TV, in the comic strips and the cartoons. Peanuts would be a great platform for this. And Schultz is reluctant because Schultz says, his words, I'm afraid it would be patronizing for me to try and write the voice of a black child. He said, sadly, I don't know that experience, and I don't feel that I'm the right person to do it. But Glickman was persistent. She stays after him. She gets some of her friends in local activism, some of the African American families, to write about what this would mean, what this representation would mean in such an iconic um, uh, cartoon strip. Of course, '68 is a crazy year already. Right in April, Martin Luther King is assassinated, and within by June, Robert Kennedy, who was also a leading voice for civil rights in the Democratic Party, assassinated, and all of this leads Schultz to say, on the one hand, I'm not the perfect person to do this. On the other hand, Peanuts is the perfect platform to say this is important. And so he says, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. He pulls the trigger and introduces, and maybe that, I'm sorry, that might have been an inappropriate metaphor there at the time, but he introduces Franklin, and he does it in the most beautiful way. The two boys meet in their swim trunks on the beach on summer vacation, and it is clear as day that these two boys are of different race, and yet it makes no difference in the world. Charlie Brown
They're just two
welcomes him
kids.
into the friend circle just like everybody else, and they have a lovely time together.
Yeah, I think that that's the remarkable thing, and I really, frankly, appreciate Schultz's journey on this. Right? It's
Mm.
like I want to, I don't know how. I want to, I'm
Yeah,
afraid I'm going to mess up. I want to,
yeah,
right? I'm afraid I'm not going to tell these stories right, or that I'm not the right person to do it. And then ultimately, like you're saying, it's this aspect of, if not me, then who?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
How could we possibly have this this platform, this massive thing where we talk about all these other things and not try? And I think it's like, yeah, listen, there's a very human story here about overcoming fear and trying to do the right thing. And look, some people are gonna hate you for it anyway. I'm sure that there
yeah,
were people
yeah,
saying, "What is this white guy from San Francisco writing about? You
yeah.
know, how can he possibly know about the black experience or anything like that?" And you get that, and at the same time, how could you not at least try? Right?
Yeah, well, and that's there's a lot of criticism over the decades, and even in recent years about Franklin and tokenism, right?
Yep.
He's just a token figure, and I do argue in that chapter in the book that Schultz, because of his trepidation, Schultz never is fully able to develop Franklin in the way that he develops some of the other characters. But also, I think it's because with Franklin, he had a very unique problem, which was that you had who do you in '66 you get Black Panther in Fantastic Four, but Black Panther is not leading a comic magazine. In fact, when he does get his own magazine, I believe it doesn't come until the early '70s that he gets his own title. It's Jungle Comics is the name of the. So there's it's all problematic. Um, but the thing about Franklin is when he comes out. In 1968, there are no other regular black characters in American cartooning animation. They're not there. Schultz has to take a character. He wants to make Franklin a positive image, right? That he is. And in fact, the first time he ever comes to the neighborhood, the takeaway, he runs into all the different neighbors of Lucy and Linus, and
Right.
meets Snoopy and all these characters. And he comes away going, this neighborhood is crazy. These people are crazy. The message is Franklin's the normal one, right? These characters are neurotic, right?
Turns
And
out that's all true.
yeah, yeah. And in the classroom, Franklin's a star student. He's a great teammate on the baseball team. He's a great kid. The challenge is that what made so many of the Peanuts characters was that they're all flawed, right? But Franklin, because of being this first standard bearer, uh, couldn't be. He couldn't
Right.
be. And so it made it really challenging. Schultz writes so many of the Peanut stories from the flaws of the characters. That's where that's the origin of the storyline, right? They have, it causes all of their crises in the story, and Franklin doesn't have those because Franklin needed to do a more important job, and in the long run, it does get Schultz criticized. But I think in the context, we have to remember what Schultz was trying to do and what that meant in that time. It wasn't perfect. But it opened the door for what could be, and that's important, even with its shortcomings.
I want to talk a little bit about the risk he takes here, which is, and you talk about this in the production of the Christmas special, which is towards the end. Charlie's like, "Hey, what's Christmas about? What's Christmas about? Christmas about?" And Linus like, "I'm gonna tell you, right?"
Yeah,
And we get this quotation from, was it Luke, if I recall correctly?
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah. Uh huh.
For those of you who grew up in the Protestant church, Luke often considered to be the most beautiful written of the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm showing my early Christianity here, Blake. Even I still have some of it in me. Tried to kill it off. Can we talk about, for those of you guys who know, Blake, I hope I'm not overstepping here as a man of deep faith. This thing I respect so much about you. I, of course, have tried to drive it from my body. And yet, we have this deep love of Charlie Brown.
Yeah,
And I want to talk about this because I think this is a really tender, wonderful thing that happens here that we simply don't see in other shows, which is you actually get a real profession of faith and quotation from a major theological text, the Christianity, the major theological text, right?
yeah.
And this scared CBS. Can you talk a little bit about like the decision to go forward, because you can't have this without this scene. You cannot have
Yeah,
this show without this
yeah,
scene. Can we
yeah,
talk about the scene, how it gets made, what's the challenges around it, and what this means?
yeah. Um, well, in some ways, one of the saving graces of Charlie Brown Christmas is that Lee Mendelson was totally blowing smoke when he said that they had this Christmas special. There's a lot of production work that goes in from the summer of '65 to have this thing ready for early December.
Insane.
For broad, yeah, 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 yeah. They are working like crazy to get this thing done, um, and it is it really, the final product gets shown in New York to the executives a matter of weeks before it's going to broadcast. Um, the CBS executives are not excited about the scripture scene. Linus taking stage. I'll tell you about what Christmas is all about. Their reason is because if you and I found this really interesting studying this for the first time. I would almost imagine the early '60s. We've just come out of the Eisenhower years, One Nation Under God and In God We Trust. We're putting all these, kind of civic religion icons, markers out there.
Mm.
There's been so much concern about, JFK is running for president, but he's not a Protestant. He's Catholic, and
What is that
all these
about?
kind of,
Right.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
And so in my imagination, I imagine the '60s being a world where Christianity is just, especially Protestant Christianity, is just slapped all over everything, and people just take it for granted. But in broadcast media, that's really not the case. Now, there are very generic and regular invocations of the church, of God, of faith, right? Hope, love, these kind of very general Christian identified ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But in a 3-network broadcast landscape, your goal was not to subsection your audiences in the ways that we do today. You're not looking for niches, however I say this word.
Nietzsche.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I just lost somebody in the audience who goes, "Oh my gosh, this guy!"
We're bringing Germans into this for.
Yeah. You are aiming for the broadest possible audience every time you go to bat, right? And so anything that could be viewed as sectarianism, as getting into particulars of religion, whoa, let's stay out of that, right?
Right.
Yeah, we're going to cause more complaints than we are, good out of this program. Well, they thought that invoking Jesus directly at the climax of the program was a step too far, right? Because then you're going to get people who are going, well, matters of theological interpretation or whatever else. Schultz is very clear with the producers in when they're making this. Mendelssohn and the animators both kind of try and push back. Are you sure about this? That might be. He said, look, if we're gonna make a program about Christmas, Christ Mass, he said, I can't make a version of that doesn't acknowledge the meaning of Christmas. So if you want a Charlie Brown Christmas, this is what a Charlie Brown Christmas is. The CBS folks were, as I said, were not excited about it. And that, to be fair, that was one of several reasons that they were not very excited about it. They thought the pacing was slow. They thought the child voice actors were less than professional. They thought that the jazz music was an odd choice.
They were wrong on everything, is what you're saying.
They were wrong. Absolutely, they were wrong. Just as we see in our own time, leading broadcast voices misreading the moment, misreading the culture, the meaning of the culture, and having to completely reevaluate after the success of particular films or election results or whatever, right?
Reviewer number 2.
Yeah. Yep. And so the plan is, CBS actual plan is, okay, we've already started running ads for this. We will broadcast it. The one night we said we broadcast it, we'll put it in the vault and we'll move on, right? Chalk it up to poor planning. And then over the next days and weeks, CBS, Coca-Cola, and United Features Syndicate, who was the publisher of Peanuts, get absolutely flooded with postcards, with letters by the thousands saying, I never thought I would see something like this on television. And a sizable portion of the response saying, I never thought I would see an American television show that acknowledges the central meaning of Christmas being Jesus and the birth of Jesus.
Right. Crazy.
And yeah. Now, again, one of the things that for some evangelical Christians, they take this to mean Charles Schulz is one of us, right? Charles Schulz is out here, going to be preaching the gospel and Bible thumping and everything else. Charles Schulz is headed in a very different direction, right? He does not think of Christianity as the type of thing that should be bludgeoned and used as a way to attack um, uh, various views on life and lifestyle and all of these things. He thinks that's the exact opposite of how Christianity should be practiced. But it is an extremely meaningful part of Charlie Brown Christmas, and it's one of the many places where Charles Schulz is just being honest about who he is. He's being honest about who he is and the way he views the world and what he thinks is important, and he insisted, and like you said, he ended up being right. He ended up being right that this was something that the culture was missing, right? That meant something to people beyond all of the regular humdrum, Christmas specials, holiday specials.
I want to ask you, Schulz has passed a little ways
Yeah.
now.
2000. He passed away.
I can't believe we're a quarter century past now.
Yeah.
What's the legacy, Blake, of Peanuts? When we go back and think, I think you point out at one point in time it was like one of the largest commercial enterprises in the world. It's still massive. You can turn around and see Charlie, Snoopy everywhere. Mm-hmm. What's the legacy of Peanuts?
Well, I think it is hard to understand the modern celebration of American holidays without Peanuts. Imagine Christmas without Charlie Brown Christmas Special, or Halloween without the Great Pumpkin. Right?
Halloween might even be bigger, right? I mean, the association with Great Pumpkin.
Yeah, absolutely. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade has not been without a Snoopy float leading it since 1968. Okay, we're going on 70 years there. 80 years. That'll be 80 years in 28. So, if I can math. 60, whatever. 60 years.
We're peppermint patties, man. We don't math.
60 years, yeah.
Some time.
But, yeah, a long time. One thing that you can't miss in this is Hallmark cards. Hallmark cards.
Oh, yeah.
That the Peanuts characters have been such a central part of so many people's birthdays and graduations and congratulation letters for cards from aunts and uncles and grandmothers and parents and also sympathy cards in some really difficult times. So Peanuts is inseparable from American understanding of modern holidays. Snoopy, in particular, in ways that I didn't imagine when I was taking on this book. In some ways, when I was working on writing this book, I thought I was writing to the baby boomers, because they were the ones who really grew up with Peanuts. They were the Peanuts kids, right? They're Charles Schulz kids' age. I did not anticipate how big Snoopy would become in Gen Z culture.
He transcends.
Yeah, he's huge, and he's made a comeback. Part of this is thanks to Apple TV Plus. Bought the rights about 7 or 8 years ago to to Peanuts, and so they're making new Snoopy programming, and it's great. It's a lot of fun, and and Snoopy is having like this whole second life online through memes and gifs and all of these sorts of things with Gen Z. I the most the most common interviews I've had in the last couple of years are from national publications wanting to talk to someone about why is Gen Z so connecting with Snoopy, so that's great fun, and I couldn't have foreseen that. Um, the other ways are that Peanuts has contributed to our cultural lexicon. When we talk about politics, when we talk about life and society, we use Peanuts metaphors all the time, right? Um, Lucy and Charlie Brown kicking the football, right?
Always.
That all the time, right?
Always.
So close, and the
It's
football
so
gets pulled
good.
away from you, right? That is, the security blanket. The security blanket. Fill in whatever your thing is that you can't let go.
Mm.
That's your little blue security blanket, right? The Snoopy as the Red Baron fighting, or Snoopy fighting the Red Baron as the World
I
War
saw
One
I
flying ace.
saw a meme about him the other day on Instagram.
Yeah. So you know all of these things, and because anybody talk to anybody who's in cartooning today, whether it's political cartoons, editorial cartoons, or they're doing some type of animation, or they're doing comic books. Talk to anybody that does popular art, and Charles Schulz is going to come up in the conversation somewhere, right? And so, because of this, because of his effect and inspiration, all-time great designs, his character designs are just, I mean, you instantly recognize Charles Schulz work,
Mm-hmm.
because they're just so perfect, right? And so simple and clean and recognizable. Um, it has led to this life far out, even as people aren't getting newspaper comic strips at their house anymore, like they did 25 years ago, 30 years ago, but yet these characters live on, and the work of Schulz lives on. He was asked again and again in his life, is Peanuts art? And I think he had a lot of different answers. Sometimes he laughed the question off. One of my favorite answers he had to that was, let's wait and see. Wait and see. Time will tell if it's art.
I love it.
And I think that's what we're witnessing is that good art persists because it will connect with a whole new generation in a different way that you couldn't expect.
Like, I got one last question for you. Today is November 12th. When is the appropriate time to play Christmas music and put up Christmas lights?
Oh, dude, the appropriate time.
When is it okay in the Ball household? When is it okay to start listening to music?
All right.
This
Well,
is a contentious issue.
Okay. Well, let me be very clear. In the Ball household, I'm drastically outnumbered, Jason. I I have three daughters and my wife,
You're done.
and so I don't make the rules in my house. I just live by them. I will tell you what happened in my house this year, as
Go
by
on.
way of answering this. We got home from trick or treating. Um, at about 7:30. It rained here. It was raining here. We went out despite the rain. We went over the whole neighborhood. We were soaking wet. We come back, The kids are all counting out their candy and they're making trades and doing all this stuff, figuring out what they got. And we weren't home 15 minutes, and my oldest daughter shouts out, "Hey Alexa, play Christmas music." It started as they were going through the Halloween candy in my house, and it hasn't stopped since. So I used to try and at least keep it until after we got back from Thanksgiving, but man, my family loves Christmas.
I got to tell you something, brother.
Yeah.
All right? I'm going to take this camera over here and go, oh!
Yes.
For those of you listening in, that's my Christmas tree, which went up November 1st. So I am Team Bull Daughters as well. I love it. Blake, buddy, you and I always have the best time. I always look forward to hanging out with you. Buddy, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me about this book that you wrote, this show that we love. Brother, let's not even wait for the next Batman. We'll find something else between now and then.
Absolutely. Dude, anytime, just let me know.
It's on, brother. I'm gonna put up a new sign in the sky instead of the bat signal. It'll just say "Good grief" or something. So we'll be all right. All right, brother. I'll yell at you later.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap here at Historians at the Movies podcast. Thank you so very much to our guest, Blake Scott Ball. Blake, thank you so much for being here. You are the gift that keeps on giving, sir. Thank you to our producer, Fletcher Powell, for making this show run. And, of course, thank you to all of you for continuing on to share and listening on the pod. If you're listening in, you want to listen to something different, we now have Reckoning with Jason Herbert. Check that podcast out as well. Google it. Google my name. You'll find us on Apple and Spotify and all the other places. If you want to help support the podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/historians at the movies or shoot us an email at hatmpodcast@gmail.com. I don't know why I can't talk. Guys, it's awesome having you around. We've got a whole lot more pods coming for you soon. But for now, I'll talk to you later. Ciao for now.